Welcome to the Talent Tide Podcast, the show that ensures that you have the information you need to adapt and change your workplace culture as you ride the wave of change. In talent management, I am your host, Chris Nichols, and today we're going to be talking employee retention with Trung Tran of Amplio. The Talent Tide Podcast is sponsored by Endevis. Endevis is a full-service recruiting firm offering a broad range of solutions from professional contracting to retained and contingency search to recruitment outsourcing. Endevis prides itself on its core values of being bold, accountable, help-first, passionate, and results-driven to ensure the talent we bring to our partners matches their own core values and overall mission. For more information, please visit endevis.com. That is ENDEVIS.com. Welcome, Trung. I'm going to give you a quick bio, and I welcome you to the call. I'm excited to have this conversation today. Mr. Tran has spent his career in Silicon Valley working for companies such as HP and Intel. He has worked on the development of more than 72 products worth $2.2 billion in revenue. His interest in AI stems from his work at DARPA on next-generation AI systems and algorithms. He remains passionate to the idea that AI should help people reason better and not replace them. Trung is an Air Force Academy graduate who spent 17 years serving the United States. Thank you for being on the Talent Tide Podcast.
No problem. Thank you. Just a little quick. I was 17 years in Silicon Valley. I was 5 years serving the country.
Oh, 5 years. Sorry, 5 years.
Yeah, no worries.
Any amount of time, there is probably plenty of time spent.
Thank you.
In that environment. So you're going to bring an interesting perspective to our listeners today, Trung, and I'm excited for you to get to share at the end what the goal of Amplio and your company is. But overall, kind of as we set the stage, we're going to be talking about employee retention, and it is September 28th, 2021, as we record this, which we're all experiencing massive turnover, a really difficult hiring market. Individuals are, it is. I don't know that it's ever been more of an employee-centric market, candidate-centric market than we have today. There's been some phases that have happened since the COVID-19 pandemic. We started with layoffs. We started with some rehires, then some more hiring, and now we've kind of evolved back into this place of trying to get the economy back to work. And I have a friend who compares the current nature of the hiring environment to the end of the very big movie Avengers Endgame, where at the end half of the people disappear and nobody knows where they went, and that seems to be what hiring individuals is like today, Trung. So it's going to be a great conversation, but tying that all together, how have the rules changed between employer and employees, not just in the COVID-19 pandemic, but over the last 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think, when you look at that, you think of like the traditional kind of employer model as, everything's a Scrooge in the Christmas Story, right? Kind of thing, where you have a boss, everyone goes to the office, and there's a work-life culture built around the office that, is very much ties everyone together. And there's a sense of sometimes family, but sometimes just missional, right? We worked a bit with the San Antonio Spurs and talk about the Spurs way, and how over the course of the pandemic, because not everyone was in the office, they lost that sense of cohesion, that sense of culture, right? That, were one of the reasons why people would stay, right? As opposed to just chasing the next paycheck or whatever it is. And so when you don't really have the sense of that culture, I know you can build it kind of remotely, but it's a different way to approach it than you had before, when you actually knew people, right? And you had lunches, you had drinks with them, and actually spent time with them. I think the other thing is that, employees aren't chasing after the traditional things. I think we've kind of evolved a little bit from the Ebenezer Scrooge days, where you work because if you didn't work, you starve, right? That's the whole problem with the main character in that story, is that if he didn't have his job with Ebenezer Scrooge, his family would starve, right? And so loyalty to the company really came down to making sure you had a steady paycheck and you had security in that paycheck, right? But I think as things evolve, the security and paycheck, came at a price sometimes. Like people weren't with their families. They, they didn't really, I look at the Japanese as the worst case example in that, where recently they had something called wives syndrome, right? Where literally the man would work for 30 years, never see his wife, never interact with her. She had her own life. And when he retired, he basically introduced himself back into her life and started yelling at her. And she got very, they got depressed and upset and stuff like that. And, that's kind of the price she paid for trying to move up the ladder and make money. And I think a lot of people don't want to pay that price anymore. The money's not worth it to them, right? In regards to that and what their goals are and what their objectives are. And so I think, over the course of time, the compensation or the ways to kind of entice employees to come is not you pay more than the next guy. It's not salary surveys and stuff like that, or you have the cooler office, right? Or any kind of perks that have to do with like parking spaces and those kind of things, right? And I also think that there is also a change in kind of the problems people have. I think when we were much more industrial or even a commercial society where companies like GE and all that kind of dominated things, there were a lot more physical things to do, right? And you're limited by what you can do physically, right? And so a lot of the emphasis on benefits and taking care of the employees were making sure they got exercise and they were able to physically do what they had to do. So workers' comp was around, did I throw my back out, or this or that. When you start moving to the knowledge economy or the information economy we have now, the physical work isn't there. I actually, when we work with the military, I always say, it's easy to figure out who's the better employee, Captain America or Steve Rogers before he became Captain America, right? It's like, who's the better soldier? It's probably going to be Captain America, right? But we have a knowledge worker, it's very much different. What their skill sets are, how they perform under pressure. It's not like he can only lift so much weight, and so he needs to kind of bend his knees before he lifts, right? How do you know what will help somebody mentally and emotionally, right? The things that are going to impact them more as a knowledge worker than any kind of physical fitness thing. We can talk about ergonomics and make sure people sit well and stuff like that, but that's a small part of what the everyday people have to do. So I think from a standpoint of what the rules are changes, you don't have the tight culture anymore, right? It's more distributed. B, the idea of what is important to employees has changed quite a bit, right? And then C, what they need from a benefits health standpoint is very, very different than what we did traditionally, where healthcare, vision, and dental, you're good to go, right? And you were healthy. We learned recently, especially during the pandemic, there's more to health than those three things, right? There's mental, emotional health, and I think those are the three things that really have changed between employer and employee. And an employer doesn't address those things, they're going to be left behind.
You mentioned the knowledge economy that we're in today, and we have we still have manufacturing jobs throughout the country, right? But it's less. Um, it's less duty-some, I guess, today than it was at one point, right? It's less assembly line and more technical skills.
Sure.
So I think for listeners, I just want to make sure that there's a clarification here of manufacturing is still always going to exist, but how technology is input into that environment is always going to be about how do we make this job more simplistic, how do we make it more available to create the product that we're creating streamlined, and because of that you're going to reduce the number of roles that you have possibly, but you are also going to have an opportunity to teach people new skills as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, the example is always the gas lighter. You used to have a guy run around the streets and turn light the gas lamps. And
Hmm.
then when electricity came in the light bulb, he had to go find another job, right? I think there's certainly that. And I think there's a artisan economy that's coming up where people are very particular things made by hand. I think, but all jobs, like even talk about artisan jobs, right? I mean, you have a 3D printer now, right? There's equipment that's highly technical, hard to use. It's enabled us to be more creative. That's what artisan jobs really come into. But there's still a certain amount of knowledge you need to have, right? And again, it's not as physically demanding, right? If you're when you were a assembly line worker back in the Model T days, you actually were doing work, right? Now
Yeah.
you watch over robots and you got to make sure that they're they're doing the right thing and writing the right code and all that stuff to make sure no one gets hurt and stuff like that. So I think there's definitely different types of training, and that's a huge thing that has to occur because anytime we have these kind of mass economic technical transitions, a lot of people get hurt, right? Because there is a transition, and the question is how fast can we move them to the next thing, right? Um, and I don't think it's all in tech. I think, like saying, there's lots of things to do. There's a lot of things in the economy that we've just ignored or gotten cheaper from other places, and I think there's a desire for better quality products, more creative products, right? That back in the one size fits all, this is the burger you get, right? Subway and Burger King say get it your way, kind of changed all that. And so mass customization means um, people have to have the creativity to be able to handle that customization. I think that transition is slowly occurring, but I think there's always going to be holdouts and groups that don't want to transition, and that's going to be the tough part.
I love what you said there because somebody that's in the recruiting space, the marketing space, sales space, we are going. There's some different levels that we went through as we've evolved into more of a technologically savvy group of an industry. So um, the difference between customization and personalization as well, right? There's a difference there that exists, and um, that also plays into how we view our work and how we are interacted with that work, right? Because a custom solution is different than a personal solution,
Right,
right? Because if you're speaking to me personally, that's different. A custom solution fits a wide group of people like me, but not me necessarily.
right.
Um, so how do organizations move to a system that allows them to treat people with the kind of empathy and respect that employees are looking for today, while also not losing um, reducing their bottom line or cutting into their profitability, which is what the end goal of every company is to make money,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure,
If they're not making money, none of us have jobs either,
sure.
right? So there's this battle that's taking place between what employees want versus what the company needs to be able to even provide the basic standards of living for the employee.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing when you think about that. And I like your comment about personalization versus customization. I think that really speaks to the employment situation today. People want to personalize their job. They want to personalize where to work, when they go to hours, what they get out of it, what the benefits are, stuff like that. And companies are very much in a customization game. They're going to take these surveys. They may occur once a quarter, once a year. Ask the employees kind of how they feel and what they need, right? Kind of thing is, and then you know you're not going to get a real good sense of what to actually do, right? And so, but you can do some generalities, right? And a lot of the HR groups we talk to, they go look at Glassdoor and make sure they have the exact same benefits or better benefits than the next person, right? Making a beauty contest. And again, that goes back to the customization theme. I'm going to customize it so it looks as good as someone else. I'm not sure you personally will use any of those benefits, or any of those benefits are actually good for you, right? Um, I'm just, again, I think the focus is mostly from a customization standpoint. We'll work on your salary, right? We'll work on your salary or some kind of additional compensation, right? And I don't think people are into that right now. They want to feel like someone cares. Just like you said, when we sell a product to somebody, right? You sell an iPhone to them. You want to say, hey, I care what you want, so I'm going to let you change the app, the screens, and what's presented to you. Change the lighting. Anything that makes it more comfortable for you to use. And I think what you've seen is that personalization has led to better revenues, right? And so the question really is how do you use that personalization um, from a job standpoint to get the more productivity, to get the higher revenues, right? Because a happy, productive employee is so much better than someone that's burnt out. And the productivity levels are just night and day. I mean, when you look at burnt out employees, 63% and look for a new job. That's not work producing things for your company. That's for sure, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that the HR approach to this has always been to ask the frontline manager to kind of build a relationship and kind of work the whole balance and those kind of things. At the same time, the frontline manager is there to make money, right? And generally speaking, especially in tech, the frontline manager was not promoted because he's the best, you know, HR, friendly guy in the world, right? He got promoted or she got promoted because they're really good at their job, right? Whatever their job is, right? And so, especially in tech, we're all introverts and we're not touchy feely people. He's not going to be equipped or she's not going to be equipped to handle things like personal issues or those kind of things, right? And so there's that disconnect in the company and customization. They think, hey, we'll have these broad policies that kind of work for a group of people, right? That we want to keep. And then if we have any other issues, we'll have the frontline manager deal with it, right? Who's not equipped to deal with it, right? And what employees want to do is they want to get back to, like going back to Ebenezer Screws, where you knew the boss, you knew kind of what's going on, they knew what your life was, right? You're not just a number or a face on a screen, right? You're actually someone. Hey, that's Chris. Chris has, I don't know how many kids you have, but a couple kids, a dog, and he likes this and that, 3 kids. Um, but that's the idea, right? I mean, the idea is that I want to feel valued as a person, not as a number, right? Not as how much money or revenue I generated, right? Or what my efficiency is in regards to work versus pay, right? I want people to know that I'm different and I need some help, right? Or some of those kind of things. There was a paycheck study recently that said that 60% of people who employees today are looking for mental health benefits, and they prioritize it, right? 80% of millennials said that they will prioritize it number one in the next job search, right? So again, is it money that's going to bring by if you don't have good mental health benefits? What are good mental health benefits, right? How are you actually helping out with the things that we're talking about that are really kind of core of the knowledge worker and the problems they're facing today? Again, I can see workers' comp eventually evolving into like things like mental breakdowns and PTSDs and stuff like that. There's so much trauma working at a certain company, right? Kind of thing that those kind of things I think will evolve, and I think we're just not equipped because we don't deal with it personally, right? To actually deal with it as companies.
So off air, we had a conversation about how humans are equipped, and you had a great analogy, and I want you to share that analogy as well. But I think that you bring up an interesting point around people and what they value. As a millennial myself, um, you know, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because 80% of millennials would say that they value their mental health in their next job. That 80% is not me, right?
Right.
I'm part of the 20% that says something different, and I want my own personalized
Exactly.
my own personalized next opportunity. The things that I want are the opportunity to be part of a team that is pushing toward a centralized goal that gives me work life balance so that I can be home with my kids on the nights and weekends. But we're trying to do hard things, right? Like I don't want an easy job. I want a
Sure.
hard job, but I also want work life balance and I want to be paid competitively, etc. So it's always interesting on how and this is just whether it's media or how we create it really comes down to the unfortunate pieces of the internet, right? Because if you're using the internet to disseminate information, the way in which you do that is by creating a headline that draws people in, right? And so we want to put everyone into a box when nobody actually is. They're all there. We're 7 billion individual boxes.
Yep. Yep. I agree with that. I think the thing is, what makes you happy, right? I mean, like I said earlier, happy employee is a productive employee, right?
Yep.
I think the mental health benefits aren't that they need a counselor, right? It's that they like to have it as a backup, as if you feel valued and you feel like you're part of a team that's doing something great. I don't think you need the mental health benefits, right? But if you work for a boss that's a jerk, right? Your project that you're working on, even though it's a great thing, gets canceled every other week, right? And yet you get jerked onto another project. Those kind of things are hard to deal with, right? And the question is, oftentimes I find that it's not how you fall down, but how you get up that matters, right? And so a lot of times, people get disillusioned. If the project you work for, I mean, I see this in video game companies, I see it in other tech companies, like when we do massive chip designs and stuff like that at Intel. You'd be working 3-4 years on a project like a video game, and the next day it gets canceled, and you spend 4 years of your life pouring your heart and soul and the team into that whole thing, and you're frankly just told to deal with it. Go on to the next thing, right? Don't complain, right? Suck it up, a buttercup, I guess, especially put it, right? And go next whatever we tell you to go do, and so you're like, wow, I just spent all my energy and my I sacrificed time with my family, I sacrificed time on the weekend, and it means nothing to the company, right? Because the next day they can just cut it off, and so I think at those times, teaching you kind of mental health skills to kind of deal with that and compartmentalize it a little bit, right? And get up better, right? Is important for a lot of people, right? I think there are always the exceptional people that can roll the punches, right? And just not care, and just compartmentalize it out. But a lot of people can't. And the question is, again, going back to the personal experience, how do you help the majority of the people? By helping them individually with whatever the problem they have, right? Because everyone will have different problems, they have different reactions to events, right? And so the question is, what is there for them? And the alternative can't be suck it up, buttercup kind of thing, right? Walk it off kind of stuff. And so that's the long term question, I think. But it's true. Everyone wants to feel valued. Everyone wants to be happy, right? And a work life balance thing, right? But happy is different for different people, right? And being valued is different for different people, right? And so you need something that's very individualized. And one of the things that we strongly believe in, and what I hate about the current era of technology, is the idea of big data. If I get enough data on every American, right, or hell, everyone on Earth, right, I can come through these statistics and come up with like this ground truth answer to how people should run or how people should do anything, right? And we rejected that a while back when we were doing work with long distance runners in Colorado. We were doing human performance there, and the guy here, he was 6'4", and his girlfriend was like 5'6". He's like, I can't run like her. My running mechanics can't be like her. My legs are longer. I have different genes. Weight distribution is different, right? Kind of thing. You need to help me run the way I run, so I can perform better. Don't tell me what everyone else is running or how they're running, because I'm not them, right? And it makes a ton of sense, when you look at the precision medicine movement with epigenomics, where your genes and your environment affect how you deal with medication. So not a 30,000 person study or 100,000 person study that says this medication is good for everyone, right? All 7 billion people on Earth. Is it targeted towards a certain population, a certain genetic type, and stuff like that? I think work has to be the same way. I mean, I think you need to understand how people individually react to medicine or your policies, right? And make sure you tailor your policies in a way that, not necessarily, um, gives away the farm, right? And you lose money as a company. But I think there's enough customization and a lot of medical benefits, stuff like that, that you just need to guide people to the right solution, right? So that they get the most out of it, or guide to the right training classes, right? To help them whatever problem they deal with, right? And you gotta give it the way for that they can do it privately, so they don't feel like their boss is looking into their life, right? And so those are the kind of things you kind of have to deal with a little bit for the kind of personalization we're talking about.
So, kind of hinting back to the analogy that you mentioned off air, you've said a few things that align to it, which I think it's now time to jump to that topic. But why are we not equipped as humans to deal with burnout, and why are we not wired to just move on from it?
Yeah, what we were talking about is the discussion I had with Dr. Michael Platt from UPenn. He runs a neuroscience initiative over at the Wharton School. And he was talking that, as hunter gatherers, we're just not equipped to deal with long term chronic stress. When you think about, back in the day, either you're with a saber tooth tiger, if you've run enough that they've given up on you and eventually you're safe, or you punch them in the nose enough that they run away, right? Kind of thing. And so they're very episodic, where all your fight or flight, all your energy, everything is consumed in that one moment, right? And generally those moments don't last like days or weeks. Otherwise, you'd run forever, right, and die from running. They last maybe 10, 15 minutes, right? And the thing is that, when we look at our and fight or flight response, which is stress management, right? We're dealing with things that we're layering on top. There's constant stress. I mean, we work a lot with U.S. cyber operators, right? And keeping the U.S. network safe and secure from foreign attacks, that's a lot of pressure, right? And you can't make a mistake, right? You can't do something stupid. You can't have an off day. And so you're always worried. It's like you're constantly staring at the lion. And he's sitting there on your shoulder staring at you the entirety of your life. You take it out on your kids when you come home because you haven't dealt with it at work, right? These it's lions there, and I think if our ancestors were constantly being watched by a lion, I don't think they would have survived, and I don't think we can survive either, unless we get the lion off our back, right? Because we can't always be afraid, we can't always be in fight mode, right? There has to be a time when we recover from it, and that's the thing that people don't do a good job of.
So how do we make that transition? How do we get there, Drung?
Sure. I think the thing is that, especially in America, we were joking the other day that we're probably not the right product for Europe, right? But there's a sense like in America and Asia. You talk about the jobs in China where people are committing suicide, and the black companies in Japan. What the Western society, other than Europe, they emphasize work. You work hard, you accomplish something, right? And the best way to find happiness is to work in something you love and work really hard at, right? Be excellent at, right? Kind of thing. And even if you're a singer or a performer, there's a lot of pressure, right? You look at Simone Biles, right? She had pressure not just to perform; she had to not just win a gold medal; she had to like break world records. I mean, talk about pressure, right? And so
Her
a lot of it,
own her own records, right?
yeah,
Like you're now up against yourself.
yeah, and that's, I mean, think about the pressure, right? You know, and she can't take a day off either, right? Kind of thing. She does; she gets criticized for it, right? And so the question really is you have to force yourself to take those breaks, right? You have to realize that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that you can't give 120% every day, right? You can't just work yourself. You have to get the time to recover. And a lot of us are never taught that. A lot of us are just, you look at gamers who game all night long, right, for like a week, and they're just like a puddle of like goo at the end of the week, kind of thing. You know, we like what we're doing. We're excited about what we're working on, right? And we just don't look to see we have to force those breaks. So we need something that monitors us and tells us, hey, it's great that you sprinted this one time, but you need X number of days to recover, right? You need to kind of pace out your work, pace out what you're doing, so that you can finish the marathon, you can finish the race, and not get burnt out. Because that's just you quitting the race. You're not actually doing and performing the way you want to, right? And that's kind of the thought process for us. Is how do we build something that monitors us so we listen to ourselves? And that's the biggest problem. When you're a high performer and you're into your job and you're running 100 miles per hour, you believe that you're indestructible to the first order, right? And you're not listening to your body. You're not listening to the fact that you're groggy and your head's clouded or wherever it is, right? The next day, you think that you can go in that meeting with no sleep, right, and kill it, right? And I think back in your 20s, you might be able to do that. But I'm pretty old, Chris, and it gets harder and harder as you get older, right? And so, from that standpoint, that's the thing that has to change. Is that a we have to give ourselves permission to recover. We don't have to constantly run the race. We have to build in time in our schedule to kind of relax. We have to build in our time in our schedule to cognitive reset. So before you walk into your house with your kids, sit in the car for 10 minutes and deal with whatever work issues you had to deal with there, and switch mindsets, right? To being, Chris dad versus Chris worker, right? Kind of thing. Um, we have to give ourselves time to do that. We have to give ourselves permission to do that. You know, just because Johnny next door it never sleeps and he just keeps working, right? Doesn't mean that I can't be just as productive, but work smarter at it, right? As opposed to work harder. And that's the key thing. I think those are the two things. Give yourself permission to take a break, right? And then build those breaks in so that you actually can recover, and try to listen to your body as much as you can.
So I know what the answer to this question is,
Sure.
but my question to you is that why is that the responsibility of the employer versus me personally?
Well, the thing is, the reality is that there's two things, right? The first is that, at least in America, 80% of us get our benefits from our employers, right? If you're looking for help, like we work with some Major League Baseball players as they went through the season to try to prep them up before they go pitch and stuff like that, and make sure that everything's taken care of for them, right, kind of thing. And that's really when you're the best of the best, everything's taken care of for you, right? You don't think about anything, right? And you have doctors on speed dial, and you're Neil Kajani of Marvel spent $5 million getting you in shape, and you have a guy for that. You have a guy for everything, right? But most of us don't have guys. Like if I have a back issue, I don't know the call. I have to go through a medical doctor and all this other stuff, recommendations, and your company has to provide you the benefits to go do that, right? Secondly, there is just the idea that your most important asset these days are your employees, right? Like, so if you had like the big assembly line robot, right, and you wanted to work 24/7, constantly work, you have to do maintenance. It's not the responsibility of the robot to do maintenance, right? It's the responsibility of the employer, the owner, that's trying to get something out of them to do the maintenance and take care of them a little bit, right? So, are we equipping our employees to actually do the maintenance, stuff like that? And that goes back to what we said earlier. How do you know you care about me as a person? How do you know you help me? You give me the right maintenance that I need, right? Not what the other guy gets, right? And you have to pay attention to it, right? Because you want the employee to work as hard and be happy and be as productive as you can be, right? And you don't expect a robot to take care of itself, and you're pushing the employee to say it's your problem. No, you put him in that situation. He's working the 24 hours, or she's taking weekends off because you need something done, or they perceive that if they did that, you promote them, right, kind of thing. So it's just like you setting up the robot, you set them up for what's going to happen, and you can watch them fail, or you can do some maintenance on them to make sure they perform for the long term, right? And that's really what it comes down to.
So is that what Amplio's mission is?
Yeah, I mean, our mission is Amplio is Latin for amplify, and we want to amplify your body's messages to you, so you are aware of what your current mental and emotional state is before things go bad. So there's still an opportunity for you actually to do something about it. And so we use wearables. We're partnered with Aura. We're partnered with Fitbit, Garmin, a bunch of wearable companies, right? And we have APIs where we take data directly from the site. We have psychometric data as well, tests, cognitive tests, as well as surveys that we give kind of on a continuing basis to you. And so we take your mental and your emotional state, and we build a model and says, okay, this is what the numbers are when Chris does well, right? He's happy, everything's going well. This is when Chris gets burnt out, he's tired, and he's not doing so well. Then we have to come up with routines that help you get from state B to state A again, right? And we want to integrate that. We call them routines because we want to integrate them into your life, right? In a way that they don't become a thing.
Right.
You have to go schedule it and think about it. You actually never do it, right? But it's something that's just in your schedule, in your calendar. What 5 minutes is, and more importantly, going back to the personalization part, the AI actually, because we're continuously monitoring you, the AI actually knows what the outcome is. So if we suggest you sleep more, like I always get that from some wearables. So you need to sleep 2 more hours, Trung. I'm like, in my life, if I could have slept 2 more hours, I would have, right? It's not something I can do, right? And whereas because I worry too much or whatever it is, right? You have to come up with other solutions to just say go sleep 2 hours earlier, right? I'm never going to go sleep 2 hours earlier, right? And so from that standpoint, if we suggest something to you and it doesn't work, we start tailoring it to you and recommend things that actually are targeted to what works best for you, because we eventually want to learn what works for you and doesn't work for you. And the nice thing about us is that we only collect your data. So we're not comparing you to anyone else. We're not comparing you to what the average employee does, right? What is Chris when he's happy, and what is Chris when he's sad? And what are the things that have worked for him in the past that got him back to happy, right? And we're constantly learning that. And that's where we call it a digital twin, but it's basically an AI that kind of learns you and is yours forever, right? Because we don't market off of it, we don't give it to anyone else. Like, what would I do with Chris's AI, kind of thing? I have my own AI because I'm different than Chris, and so those kind of things that that's what we try to do. So once we teach the employees to manage it, we do it in an employer situation because the employer has to take the ball when things get bad. What I mean by that is, um, you know, one of the defense contractors here had to bring back their employees um, in in the September of last year, and over 30,000 of those employees said that I'm sorry, 3,000 of those employees said that they experienced anxiety. Some so bad that they were shaking their car 15 minutes before they went into the office because this was the height of the COVID stuff, right? You weren't sure how you got it and all this other stuff, and eventually, the defense contractor set up some anxiety experts and kind of brought in mental health to help them. And that's the thing for us. We're going to help you cope and manage yourself. But if things start really going off the rails, we want to hand it off to an EAP program. We want to hand it off to other benefits so you actually get the help you need, right? So we call the whole thing your mental health journey. You have routines in there, right? And we're trying to monitor where, sometimes you just have a bad day and things go off the rails, right? It doesn't mean that you can't ever recover, you can't come back, right? But you want something that kind of monitors you and says, okay, Chris, you're really going off the rails here, right? And you need to talk to somebody, right? And that's what we want to be. We want to be kind of that buddy that helps you do that. And we want the company to be involved in it because the company, has to also realize that Chris needs a break. He's a great performer. He deserves a couple of days off to just reset, and those kind of things. And so, we don't give the data to you, but we want you to self advocate for that, and the company needs the policies in place to support you on that, right? I think that's how you take care of your employees, right? Because if it's just you and you coping, you can only cope with so much. If the job sucks and your boss hates you, kind of thing. But we want you to be aware that you gotta get out of that environment. If your boss hates you, right, you're in constant stress, and your work's deteriorating, you need to go ask HR or go ask some method for getting some relief from a company standpoint as well. So we kind of see it as kind of a dual dance. We're helping you
Yeah,
manage
no, I
yourself, and
love
then go
that.
from there. Yeah,
That's a very cool tool. A clarifying question. So,
sure.
will the tool allow to say I'm on a team of 10 people, we report all to the same leader? Is there an ability? Because I'm guessing no, based upon what you said. But is there an ability to aggregate the overall happiness of a team?
There is and so we're thinking about an organizational dashboard, and we talked to a bunch of HR directors and stuff like that, and some frontline managers, and they said, honestly, Trung, I wouldn't know what to do with this. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with, some. We realize that we have to do the same thing we're doing with the employee, because basically our philosophy in the employee is that you don't want to know your data. All your data is going to tell you is that a bunch of charts and numbers, and you have to interpret it, right? You want us to interpret it for you, and then we want to give you recommendations. You can still look at your data because you own it, right? But from a standpoint, you need some kind of solution. It's great to know that I have cancer, but what do I do about it, right? Kind of thing. I think the same thing is true for an organization, but I don't think, like I say, the organizations during this big transition are archaic at best. To have these yearly surveys, to have these policy procedures that are not very tailored to the employee, right? And they're scrambling right now. They don't know what to do. And I think, as we provide more data to them and we can kind of explain how they can use that data and interpret it for them, right? So that they know how to react. I think that's good. We have to make sure it's anonymized so that none of your data gets leaked out and no one says Chris is the problem, right? Kind of thing. But there are things like, if this number of people, like half your employees are experiencing anxiety, or half your employees aren't sleeping, or under constant stress, or this one team never sleeps, right? Kind of thing. And they're all like, you go, hey, that team needs to be cycled off, right? That team needs to, because sometimes in business you just kind of dump it on the best people all the time until you ride them to death, right? And the question is, hey, these groups need to kind of get the time off, and I think that's management, and HR has to learn how to do that, right? And but the thing is that we give them the fidelity. They never had the fidelity before to actually understand what the issues are, right? And so I'm hoping over the next 5-10 years that we can help work with HR departments to really help them understand how to make that transition. But right now they tell me they don't want the data because they don't know what to do with it.
They have to do something with it, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so much track in front of us on this topic, and I think we probably most often view it from the lens of I can't even accomplish what I need to accomplish today
Right.
and that's less hard, right? Because people's feelings and emotions are difficult, and it is very hard to personalize. And you know, HR managers did not go to school to be psychology majors, right? They
Right.
went to school to work in human resources because they wanted to help people, but that doesn't also automatically make them the most prepared to have conversations with people about their feelings and their emotions.
Right, right. And that's the thing. That's why the AI is the recommendation is that we work with clinical psychologists out of UPenn, USC, and Colorado,
Yeah,
right? That are looking at, hey, this is the interpretation, this is what they need. But again, like if it gets bad, I think 80, 90% of us can just have coping mechanisms and we're fine. We'll power through it, right? Kind of thing. But if it gets bad, you don't want that employee that comes in with a gun and shoots up the office, right? You
yeah,
want to be able to, I think just from a liability and security standpoint, you need to have a good sense of what's going to happen, right?
you
Because
do.
people are super unhappy, especially during the pandemic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and so the
Amplified it. I think
yeah,
just this week we saw that last year was the most murders, I think maybe on record, or
right,
the biggest increase year over year. Um, it's a really difficult time right now, and I think that your technology, I'm very hopeful for it, Trung. I'm looking forward to you all making waves over the next few years at different conferences and getting your name and things out there. I hope this can play a role in it, but I think
absolutely.
that it's wonderful what you all are trying to do, trying to give employees the power to help themselves, which I think is also the most valuable thing that you can give someone is the ability to help themselves. So, Trung, thank you again for coming on. Check out Amplio if you're interested in learning more about their software and their AI and what it's doing for organizations. And Trung can be found on LinkedIn, Trung Tron. And that's another wrap on the Talent Tide podcast. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and rate wherever you listen or watch the podcast, from Apple to Spotify to YouTube. And remember, success is on the other side of fear. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Thank you.